Their message was never meant to be heard. Humans heard it, and everything changed. The jungle planet Craxus 9 stretched endlessly beneath a burning red sky, its twisted canopy weaving a suffocating labyrinth. Thick vines hung like chains from towering trees, their roots writhing in the mud as if alive. The air was a heavy cloak of humidity and decay, thick with the stench of rot and danger. Screeches of unseen predators echoed through the oppressive heat, punctuated by guttural growls from creatures lurking just beyond sight. Craxus 9 was no ordinary prison. It was a sentence carved in flesh and blood. The Valari Dominion had designed this world as a crucible for their worst criminals and exiled soldiers. Here, survival was a cruel game of predators and prey, where every step could mean a trap and every breath could be your last. The prisoners were a savage gallery of the galaxy's rejected, alien warriors with jagged armor, genetically altered beasts bred for violence, and desperate souls clinging to life. Shackled and hunted, they fought to survive against each other and the planet itself. Craxus 9 did not forgive. It demanded strength, and it took no prisoners. Sergeant Elias Cord stood alone, his eyes scanning the alien horizon through sweat-drenched lashes. His once pristine uniform was torn, his gear stripped away, leaving only the cold steel of a combat knife pressed against his palm. No guns, no gadgets, just a simple blade and a mind sharpened by years of war. Cord's lips curled into a bitter half-smile. "One knife, one soldier," he muttered under his breath. He wasn't a hero, just a man fighting to stay alive in a place designed to break men. Memories flashed unbidden. Missions completed, comrades lost, a life once filled with purpose. Now reduced to raw survival, the weight of his isolation pressed down like the crushing jungle canopy. But Cord's mind was a fortress. Training drilled deep, instincts honed to razor sharpness. He knew Craxus 9 was more than hostile ground. It was a brutal stage where alliances could save a life or shatter trust with a single betrayal. Every step forward was a calculated risk. He would have to fight, yes, but more than that, he would have to outthink horrors his enemy could never imagine. Inside, a storm raged. Cord wrestled with more than just alien beasts. He battled the creeping doubt that survival might cost his very soul. Would he hold on to his humanity when everything else was stripped away? Craxus 9 wasn't just a prison. It was a living war zone. The planet itself seemed to conspire with the cruelty of its captors. Massive creatures with claws like scythes prowled the tangled undergrowth. Toxic plants writhed like serpents, ready to poison any who stumbled unwary. The ground was slick with mud and blood, a graveyard where thousands had vanished. Among the chaos, rival factions of prisoners carved out brutal territories. Alien mercenaries with cybernetic implants, monstrous hybrids bred for slaughter, and desperate outlaws all clashed endlessly. Trust was a rare commodity, and betrayal lurked behind every whispered deal. Alliances formed and shattered with brutal swiftness, each player desperate to survive the relentless nightmare. For Elias Cord, the challenge was clear. The planet was a maze of death traps, but the true peril was the tangled web of alien rivalries. To live, he would have to navigate not just the dangers of Craxus itself, but the unpredictable fury of 10,000 enemies, each with their own motives, fears, and grudges. A chilling broadcast cut through the galaxy's networks, a cold, cruel proclamation from the Valari Dominion. The camera focused on Cord's solitary figure stepping onto Craxus 9, his form dwarfed by the alien wilderness. "One human has entered Craxus," the Dominion's voice boomed, voice dripping with menace. "Let this be a lesson in extinction. 10,000 of you, one of him." The message was clear. This was not just punishment, it was a spectacle designed to humiliate. The Dominion dared to challenge humanity itself, to prove that a single soldier was no match for their crushing might. The broadcast was shown across star systems, a warning to Earth and any who dared oppose the Volari. But Kord's expression didn't falter. Beneath the glare of 10,000 eyes, he stood alone, but not broken. This was a gauntlet thrown down in arrogance, and Kord was ready to make sure it was a mistake the Dominion would never forget. The cold steel of Kord's knife gleamed faintly under the alien sun, a simple weapon, but in his hands, a beacon of hope. This blade was more than metal. It was a promise that humanity would not go quietly into the void. Every scar on its edge told a story. Close calls, brutal fights, moments where survival hinged on split-second decisions. The knife was Kord's anchor to his past, his training, and his stubborn refusal to surrender. As 10,000 hostile aliens closed in, each determined to see the last human fall, Kord gripped the knife tighter. He was outnumbered, outgunned by forces beyond imagination. But the blade was a reminder. In the face of impossible odds, it was human ingenuity and raw will that would carve a path through the darkness. With every breath, every slash, the knife whispered a defiant truth. This was not the end. This was just the beginning. The jungle of Caraxes 9 stretched endlessly. Dark green canopies tangled above, dripping with moisture and heavy with silence. The air was thick, each breath a wet weight on Sergeant Elias Kord's chest. Every step he took was careful, deliberate, his boots sinking into the damp earth that seemed alive with unseen eyes. The jungle pulsed, not with life, but with malice. Kord's heart hammered, not from fear, but from the sharp edge of focus. His eyes scanned every shadow, every flicker of movement. He was no longer the hunter, he was the prey. From the tangled depths, shapes emerged. Slender, multi-limbed, their bodies rippling with sinewy muscle and razor claws glinting like shards of obsidian. Their glowing eyes locked onto him like predators honing in on a kill. The Volari hunters. Kord's knife was the only weapon in his hands. No backup, no guns. Just grit and training. He moved like a ghost through the underbrush, setting crude traps, tripwires made from vines, sharpened sticks hidden in the mud. The first predator lunged, jaws snapping, but Kord was faster. His blade found the creature's throat, cutting a silent death. One by one, the hunters came. Kord danced between them, weaving through the chaos with a cold mind and a burning will to live. Each kill was savage and swift, a brutal testament to human survival instincts honed over millennia. The jungle echoed with the sounds of struggle and silent victory. When the last predator fell, Kord stood alone in the dark, his breath ragged, but his spirit unbroken. The jungle seemed to shudder, as if recognizing that this human was no ordinary prey. The game had only just begun. As Kord rested beneath the heavy leaves, a harsh truth settled over him like a stone. These predators were not wild beasts. They were tools, hired killers with a purpose. A flicker from his damaged communicator revealed the real nightmare. A broadcast from the Volari Dominion, cold, precise, ruthless. They had placed a bounty on his head, a price stamped with cruel certainty. Kill Elias Kord and earn your freedom. The Volari ruled Caraxes 9 with iron fists and shadowed cruelty. Their control was absolute, their hatred of humanity legendary. For them, Kord was more than a soldier. He was a symbol, a thorn in their side that needed to be ripped out. This revelation twisted inside Kord like a blade. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting a war against a system designed to erase him. The bounty was not just a contract, it was a message, a challenge thrown across the void. Die, human, or be crushed beneath our boots. But the fire inside Cord did not falter. Instead, it flared brighter. He would not be broken. If the Volari wanted a spectacle, he would give them one they'd never forget. Wandering through the dense jungle, Cord's eyes caught the faint glint of metal twisted amidst the trees. A drop pod, half buried, battered, scarred by some forgotten battle. It was a relic from a failed mission, a tomb for a lost soul. He pried open the hatch, the stale air inside thick with silence. Most of the pod systems were dead, smoke and sparks the only signs of its former power. But among the ruins, Cord found a few intact pieces, a basic terrain map, flickering faint sensors, the echo of technology still alive. For a moment, hope bloomed. These simple tools were not much, but they gave him an edge, the chance to anticipate the jungle's shifting threats, to plan his next moves with cold precision. Yet the pod's ruin was a brutal reminder. Even the most advanced technology could be rendered useless here. This jungle was a devouring beast, stripping away armor and weapons alike. Cord's fingers brushed the cracked control panel. The weight of isolation settled again, the brutal fact that in this jungle, survival was never guaranteed. The pod was a beacon of hope, yes, but only a flicker in an ocean of darkness. Alone, hunted, and armed with little more than a knife and fading technology, Elias Cord did something unexpected.
He laughed. The sound was raw, sharp against the oppressive silence of the jungle. 10,000 aliens, and they gave me a knife? His voice was a low mutter, rough with exhaustion but alive with defiance. Guess they're the ones in danger. That laughter was not madness. It was rebellion, the wild, untamed spirit of humanity refusing to bow. In a universe where fear could freeze the strongest men, Cord chose to mock it, to stare down death with a grin. The absurdity of the situation, one soldier against a swarm of alien hunters, only fueled his resolve. It was a primal roar of resistance, a spark that lit a fire inside him. The jungle might be a tomb for others, but Cord's laughter declared it a battleground. This was not the end. It was a beginning. With a sharpened mind and heart burning brighter than ever, Cord reshaped his mission. Survival was no longer enough. He would become the hunter. No longer content to hide and react, he began planning. Sabotage, guerrilla tactics, psychological warfare against the Volari hunters who believed themselves masters of this world. Cord imagined traps that went beyond mere death, ones that broke spirits and shattered alliances. The Volari Dominion wanted a spectacle, a dead human, a warning to all. Instead, they would get a nightmare. Every fallen predator was a message, every disrupted supply line a crack in their iron grip. Cord's war was now as much mental as physical, a battle for dominance in a prison planet designed to crush him. He thought of the galaxy watching, of humanity's pride on the edge of oblivion. The Volari underestimated the strength of a human who refused to surrender. With every step, Cord vowed to rewrite the story. The hunter had become the hunted, but now he was hunting back. The air hung thick with dust and the metallic scent of decay on Croxus 9, a brutal prison planet carved from jagged rocks and toxic swamps. Alien suns barely pierced the thick clouds, casting a gloomy twilight over shattered ruins where desperate creatures prowled for survival. The once scattered factions, predators, mercenaries, and enslaved outcasts had begun to speak in hushed tones, their ancient rivalries momentarily forgotten. A storm was brewing. At the heart of this chaos was Cord, a solitary human whose reputation had grown like wildfire. Now a web of unlikely alliances formed with one singular purpose: to capture him. The Zenthrians, serpentine hunters with razor-sharp instincts, eyed the brute strength of the Gorloks, reptilian mercenaries with claws capable of tearing through armor. Even the enslaved Narek, fragile and timid, gathered courage to join the hunt, motivated by whispers of freedom promised by the Dominion's overseers. Their motives were tangled. Some sought riches hidden in Kord's capture, others yearned for power, while a few hoped to bargain for their own release. Old wounds and blood feuds simmered beneath the surface, threatening to unravel the fragile truce. Yet the promise of a prize greater than any personal vendetta forced them together. Kord, once a lone shadow moving through the wasteland, found himself ensnared in this volatile coalition. The Predator's eyes gleamed with anticipation. The mercenaries sharpened their weapons. The enslaved Narek whispered their prayers. The hunt had become more than survival. It was a spectacle. A war of cultures and ideologies clashing violently in a prison where trust was a currency more rare than oxygen. And Kord was the prize.
Kord crouched beneath a twisted iron scaffold, muscles taut, breathing shallow. His eyes scanned the cracked earth and tangled underbrush, every detail etched into memory. Here, in the ruins, he was no longer prey. He was the predator. Years of brutal survival had taught him to use the unforgiving landscape as a weapon. He laid traps of sharpened bone and tripwires coated with venom harvested from native insects. His footsteps were ghosts in the mud, his presence a whispered warning in the jungle's roars. Each ambush was calculated, feints to lure the enemy into traps, decoys fashioned from scraps of his torn uniform. Psychological warfare became his shield, disembodied echoes in the cavernous tunnels, shadows flickering where none should be. Fear spread like wildfire among the alien factions, each failure deepening their desperation. Kord's mind was a battlefield as much as the physical world. He exploited the weaknesses of his pursuers. Zethrians vulnerable to poison, Gorlaks easily enraged by deception, Narek terrified by sudden darkness. Every kill was precise, almost surgical, a testament to his mastery of asymmetrical warfare. The prison itself became his weapon. He used toxic swamps to drown pursuers, collapsed ancient tunnels to bury entire squads, and ignited fungal spores that sent swarms of bioluminescent insects to confuse and blind his enemies. With every successful strike, Kord's legend grew, an invisible force turning the tide of a war he never wanted to fight. In the eerie stillness of a cavern deep beneath the ruins, Kord's fingers closed around the sleek shell of a Calm's drone. It buzzed faintly, its sensors flickering alive. The Valari Dominion's silent eyes and ears, once a tool of his enemies, were now his own. He flipped through intercepted transmissions, alien voices dripping with frustration and fear. Plans to encircle him, betrayals whispered behind closed doors, strategic weaknesses revealed in hushed tones. The drone became a pulse of the prison's heartbeat, each signal a map to the faction's secrets. Kord's lips curled in a grim smile. The hunter had become the hunted. The whispers spoke of the human monster, a ghost that slipped through shadows and shattered their strongest formations. Tales spread of impossible escapes, traps sprung without warning, and a ferocity that no alien mind could comprehend. But it was not just information, it was a weapon. Kord manipulated the drone's broadcasts, seeding false trails, turning factions against one another. Trust fractured like glass. The enemy's fear grew, their confidence shattered. In the dark, Kord felt a surge of power, not just physical, but psychological. The prison was no longer just a cage, it was his stage, and the performance had only just begun. Kord's stealth brought him to a clearing bathed in ghostly moonlight, where a small figure huddled, trembling. Kiv, a child no larger than a fox but with shimmering iridescent skin, stared up with wide, terrified eyes. Enslaved by a ruthless gang of raiders, the child's fate had seemed sealed. Cord did not hesitate. He moved like a shadow, dispatching the raiders with brutal efficiency. When the last echo of violence faded, he knelt beside Kiv, whose fragile hands reached for his. In that moment, amidst the violence, something fragile blossomed. Hope. Kiv's innocence was a stark contrast to the chaos around them. The child's gentle touch and simple words, "You save me, why?" pierced through Cord's hardened exterior. For the first time in months, the weight of survival was balanced by something deeper, a purpose beyond death and destruction. Guided by Kiv's instinctive knowledge of the jungle, Cord found moments of calm in the madness. The child's unwavering belief in kindness became a beacon amid the darkness, forcing Cord to confront the monster he was becoming. Was there still humanity beneath the scars and blood? Their bond grew, a fragile alliance where strength met vulnerability. Kiv was not just a companion, they were the soul tethering Cord to the man he once was and might yet become.
From the shadowed halls of Valeri Command came Ra-Tal, a figure carved from cold steel and absolute authority. Clad in obsidian armor etched with cruel runes, Ra-Tal moved like the executioner of a dark god, his very presence suffocating hope. Assigned to end the spectacle of Cord's rebellion, Ra-Tal's elite gladiators scoured the wasteland. Where Cord's methods were guerrilla and unpredictable, Ra-Tal's were methodical and merciless. Every hunt was a calculated strike, every capture a display of brutal precision. Ra-Tal's cold gaze measured Cord not just as a threat, but as a puzzle to be solved and destroyed. The clash was inevitable, ingenuity against order, chaos against discipline. As the enforcer tightened his net, whispers of dread spread among the factions. Ra-Tal was not just a hunter, he was judgment incarnate. His arrival marked a turning point, a dark promise that the prison's fragile balance was about to shatter in blood. In the silence between battles, Cord grappled with the man he was becoming. Each kill sharpened his survival, but dulled his soul. Blood stained his hands and dreams alike, and the line between right and wrong blurred beneath Craxus 9's harsh skies. His actions saved his life, but at what cost? Kiv's innocent eyes haunted him. The child's unwavering faith in good challenged Cord's darkest thoughts. Was he a savior or a monster? Could he fight the prison's brutality without becoming it? Haunted by memories of home, of a world where humanity thrived on hope and compassion, Cord's internal war raged as fiercely as the external one. He questioned every choice, each life taken, every trap sprung, and feared the man he might lose himself to. Survival demanded ruthlessness, but his heart clung to a fading humanity. The struggle was no longer just for life, it was for his soul. Flames roared against the night as Cord unleashed his wrath on the faction's lifeline, a sprawling food depot nestled deep in the jungle's heart. Swarms of native fire beetles ignited at his command, their luminescent bodies spreading wildfires that devoured storage pods and supply caches. The crackling inferno shattered the alien faction's fragile balance. Starving creatures cursed the smoke-choked air as their war effort faltered. Cord's rage blazed with the fire, a defiant message carved in smoke and ash. The human spirit would not be broken. This was no mere sabotage. It was a declaration. The factions, forced to scramble for survival, diverted their attention from the hunt to their own dying resources. Cord had shifted the war, not by brute force alone, but by striking at their very heart. Cord's cunning knew no bounds. He led a pack of war beasts, towering armored creatures bred for bloodshed, into the stronghold of a ruthless faction.
The beast's snarls echoed as they burst through gates, turning hunting hounds into hunted prey. Chaos erupted as the war beasts tore through alien ranks, their savage instincts unleashed against their former masters. The faction's fortress became a tomb of their own making, crushed beneath teeth and claw.
The destruction was absolute, a brutal spectacle that bolstered Kord's legend. Nature, once tamed by the prison's masters, had been unleashed as a weapon in human hands. In the ashes, whispers grew louder. Kord was not just a survivor, he was a force of nature, a phantom no one could cage. Stories spread like wildfire through the prison's dark veins. Kord was no longer simply hunted, he was feared. Some factions froze, their hunters too scared to move. Others whispered prayers for the human who defied death, while secret gatherings debated whether to follow him. Revolt simmered in hidden corners. Prisoners who once bowed to despair now saw in Kord a symbol, a spark of rebellion against the Valari Dominion's iron grip. His legend transcended flesh and blood, becoming a myth, a rallying cry. The prison's brutal hierarchy trembled as alliances cracked and new loyalties formed. The hunt had changed. Kord was not just fighting to survive, he was leading a revolution. And in the shadows of Craxus 9, the storm of rebellion was ready to break. A blood-red sun cast eerie shadows through the shattered domes of Craxus 9. Inside the prison's central broadcast chamber, Rital, the Valari enforcer, paced before a flickering screen. The image of Kiv, bound, bruised, defiant, was transmitted across every cell block. Her fate had become a spectacle. Rital's voice thundered over the intercom. "Let all who resist see what happens to those who defy order. Her execution begins at dawn." Kord watched from the shadows of the lower barracks, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened. Rage twisted in his gut, but deeper still was the fear. Not fear of death, but of failure. Kiv had once believed in him, called him more than a killer. Now she was bait. Rital knew it would draw him in. Kord's breath grew heavy. A decision loomed. Prisoners everywhere went silent. Hope flickered, dimmed by dread. Rital had turned the prison into a theater of despair. But for Kord, it was something else. A final call to arms. He turned to his ragtag crew. "We don't have much time. This ends now." The cold walls of the maintenance corridor felt tighter than usual as Kord walked alone, the hum of energy conduits barely masking his internal war. He'd spent years becoming the monster this place demanded, efficient, ruthless, but Kiv had changed him. She saw the humanity buried beneath his scars. Now she was the bait in a trap he couldn't ignore. He reviewed the limited options. Charging in would mean death. Waiting would mean letting her die. Either choice was a betrayal. Of her, of himself. He leaned against the wall, eyes shut. The voices of fallen friends echoed in his mind. Had he become what he once vowed to destroy? He opened his eyes. If I die for nothing, it ends. But if I live for something... He trailed off, looking toward the storage hall where smuggled weapons lay hidden. Inside, a cracked mirror reflected a man torn by guilt and duty.
He spoke softly to his reflection. If this is who I am now, then I'll make sure it counts. The old transmitter had barely any power left, but Cord didn't need clarity. He needed conviction. He stood in front of the mic, the dim red emergency lights casting his shadow across a cracked control panel. Behind him stood a handful of prisoners, eyes uncertain, but watching. He spoke slowly. You think this place is your grave, that the Volari own you, but I've seen what fear looks like in their eyes, and I know this, fear can bleed. Static flickered, but the voice cut through. They tell you, kill me and you'll be free. But what if we kill them? A pause, then louder. You're all pawns, pieces on a board they flip for fun, but together, we become the storm. We become the hand that flips the board. The speech reached every wing. Scars, tattoos, alien markings, all turned toward the echoing message. A grizzled Drastin leaned close to a fellow prisoner. Maybe it's time. Cord ended with a challenge. This isn't about me. This is about every one of us who wants to live free, not survive. Live. Make your choice. Chaos churned through Caraxus 9. Cell doors rattled, secret knocks were answered, weapons were unearthed from hidden compartments under floor tiles and ventilation shafts. The Nalkari, once mercenaries for the Volari, turned. A blood debt owed to Cord was called in. The insectoid Yasharn, brilliant in tunnels, agreed to sabotage power conduits. Even the cold-eyed Sarathi, silent for years, joined in with venom-tipped blades. Cord moved through the storm like a commander forged in fury. No factions, no species, just one enemy, and they bleed like us. The first wave struck at the food distribution center. Alarms screamed, Volari guards panicked. They had expected scared prisoners, not an army. Kiv's location was known now. The plan had to move fast. In the madness, a Volari commander was dragged from a control tower. Message to your masters, growled Cord. Their reign ends tonight. Storm clouds boiled over Caraxus 9 as the prisoners marched toward the command spire. Once unreachable, now in their sights. Cord stood at the front, flanked by alien warriors, human survivors, and even children carrying makeshift bombs. They advanced through sewage tunnels. Explosions above rocked the ground. Cord had mapped every inch of this hellhole. Now it was their battlefield. The Volari were dug in, turrets whirred, drones buzzed like angry hornets, but the prisoners fought like nothing to lose was everything to gain. A Drastin stormed a corridor, shoulder blasted off but kept charging. A human teen threw EMP grenades from his dead brother's satchel. Cord led through chaos, slicing down guards, issuing orders with cold efficiency. Kiv's holding cell was rigged to blow. Cord reached it in time, cradling her as the blast rocked the tower behind them. They pushed forward, one wall at a time. Blood soaked the ground, but the prisoners did not stop. At last, the central tower loomed. Cord turned to his team. Get ready. The beast waits at the top.
The tower's command chamber was quiet, too quiet. Rital stood by a massive window overlooking the carnage below. His armor gleamed. His blades dripped. You think you've won? He sneered. You're still an animal in a cage. Cord stepped forward, pulling the knife from his belt. Maybe. But today, the animal bites back. They clashed, steel against steel, ideology against ideology. Rital fought with precision. Cord fought with pain. Blades tore into flesh. Cord screamed, not from agony, but from every loss, every buried memory. He drove the knife into Rital's shoulder. They collapsed, panting, bleeding. Rital laughed weakly. "You've doomed them all." Cord leaned in. "No, you just proved we were right to fight." Cord stood over Rital, knife in hand. Blood pooled beneath them. Rital's eyes burned with hatred. Cord hesitated. "You want death. You want the easy way out." He leaned closer. "But I've learned something. Death ends the fear. Living with defeat? That scars." He threw the knife aside. "You can die screaming, or you can crawl back to your empire and tell them what one human with a knife can do." Rital snarled, but said nothing. For the first time, he looked small. With Rital broken and command collapsed, the Velari forces crumbled. Escape pods launched in waves. Drones crashed mid-air. Prisoners swarmed the tower. Flags, makeshift and stitched from rags, rose atop broken spires. The system had fallen apart. Cord watched from a balcony, hands still bleeding. Kiv stood beside him. "They're running," she whispered. He nodded. They should. Velari transmissions begged for reinforcements. None came. Craxus 9 was a storm the galaxy hadn't seen before. Days passed. Smoke cleared. The air smelled of iron and rain. Cord walked through the prison yards, now camps of rebuilding. Alien children played near a dismantled turret. Humans and Sarathi shared food. It was fragile. It was peace. Kiv, her wounds healing, spoke to a crowd. "We didn't just escape. We changed something, here and out there." Cord smiled faintly. The walls of Craxus 9 still loomed, but they no longer felt like a cage. The war wasn't over, but for the first time, they had something worth fighting for. Humanity had not just survived the prison, it had rewritten it. The sun broke over the jagged horizon of Craxus 9, casting golden light over the twisted jungles and blackened ruins. Once a prison planet, ruled by the brutal Velari, it now breathed with new life. The cages were torn down, the surveillance towers toppled, and the air hummed not with fear, but with the energy of hope. The inmates who had once crouched in the shadows were now the architects of a new world. They moved with cautious optimism, building homes from salvage, carving irrigation channels, and organizing councils where violence had once ruled. Humanity led the effort, but they were not alone. Other species, former prisoners, former enemies, joined them. A fragile peace held them together, built not on trust, but on the shared memory of chains. The wilds of Craxus 9 remained dangerous. The jungles whispered with predators, and the remnants of Velari tech lurked beneath the soil. Yet the people were undeterred. They planted crops, they trained their children, they sang songs in the night, hymns of survival and new beginnings. This was no longer a prison, it was a crucible. The people who had been thrown away had forged something enduring from their pain. But peace came with its own tests. Old rivalries simmered, the need for leadership grew. And just as a new order began to take shape, the man who had sparked the revolution disappeared. Cord never wanted to lead. He was the blade in the dark, not the voice at the podium. After the last battle, after the chains fell and the Velari fled, he vanished into the jungle. No goodbyes, no speech, just silence and the soft tread of boots fading into the undergrowth. Some say he couldn't bear the weight of leadership. Others believe he feared becoming the very thing he had fought to destroy.
but those who knew him understood. Freedom, to Cord, meant choosing his own path. Power was just another kind of prison. He left behind confusion and a void no one could fill. People built statues, told stories, waited for him to return. But Cord was gone. Still, the jungle echoed with his memory. Every shadow, every quiet wind seemed to whisper his name. His absence didn't weaken the people, it made them stronger. Because in his refusal to rule, Cord taught them the final lesson. True freedom cannot be handed down, it must be claimed. Cord's name faded, but his legend grew. Around fires and in new classrooms, children listened with wide eyes to tales of the man with the knife. They spoke of how he took down armored Velari with nothing but a blade and rage, of how he moved through the prison like a ghost, always one step ahead, always fighting for those too weak to fight for themselves. His duel with Artal became the stuff of myth. Some say Cord didn't kill him, but stared so deep into his soul that the alien died of fear. Others claimed the ground split beneath them, swallowing Artal into the prison's core. Whatever the truth, Cord became a symbol, a reminder that one human, broken and unarmed, could ignite a revolution. His legend traveled beyond Craxus 9, carried by traders, ex-prisoners, and diplomats. In dark corners of the galaxy, where oppression still reigned, rebels invoked his name, not as a general, not as a king, but as a warning. The man with the knife is coming, they'd whisper, and tyrants would flinch. Kiv had been just a child when she arrived in Craxus 9, stolen from her homeworld and sold into captivity. She watched her parents die. She watched Cord fight. And when the dust settled, she picked up more than just the pieces of survival. She picked up his dream. Guided by memory and myth, Kiv rose. She studied languages. She sought peace when others wanted revenge. While others remembered pain, she remembered Cord's quiet fire, the way he never bowed, never broke.
Years later, Kiv became Craxus 9's ambassador to the wider galaxy. She stepped into rooms full of aliens who once saw her people as animals and forced them to see something new: dignity. She used Cord's story not as a weapon, but as a bridge. She told of a man who walked away from power, a man who bled so others could live. And in those stories, old enemies found common ground. Kiv forged treaties. She mended old wounds. And with every alliance, she built something Cord never had the chance to: peace. Deep in the jungle, far from the cities and council chambers, Cord sat beneath a tree older than any prison. The leaves above glowed faint blue in the moonlight, whispering secrets of a world reborn. He didn't miss the battles. He didn't miss the politics. What he missed were the moments in between, the quiet breath after victory, the laughter of the young, the first time someone called him a brother instead of a number. Cord had fought aliens, monsters, tyrants, but the hardest battle had been remembering who he was. Not just a weapon, not just a symbol, a man. He realized now that the true war was never against the Velari. It was against despair, against silence, against the belief that freedom was impossible. Humanity had won, not because they survived, but because they chose to be more than survivors. They chose to build, to forgive, to remember. And that made all the pain worth it. Craxus 9 stood at a crossroads. The cities gleamed with fresh metal and worn stone. Children played where guards once patrolled. Alien species gathered in shared markets, exchanging stories, food, culture. But under the surface, tensions simmered. Old wounds festered. Resources were scarce. Some whispered about splitting the planet, about carving out territories based on race or origin. Yet hope endured.
in the way neighbors helped rebuild after a storm, in the laughter that filled the night air, in the shared belief that what they had created was precious. Craxus 9 wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. And for the first time, they had the right to fight for its future, not as prisoners, but as a people. Cord's name faded into the jungle, but his legacy never did. New leaders quoted him, soldiers studied his tactics, poets wrote verses of his defiance. On 100 worlds, his story inspired revolts, whispered rebellions, quiet dreams of freedom. They called him a hero, a ghost, a god. But Cord had been none of those things. He was a man who had seen injustice and chose to act. A man who had lost everything, yet gave more. His impact wasn't in what he built, but in what he unleashed.
Hope. That was his true gift. And in every child who spoke his name, in every flag raised over a free city, in every whisper that said, "We can fight," Cord lived on. The air inside the Valeri Command Center was crisp, too sterile, too silent. Young Officer Rallick stood rigid, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on the holomap pulsing in blue hues across the room's central projection core. His uniform still bore the faint scent of the Academy, polished, fresh, untouched by blood or consequence. But it was the whispers that unnerved him. Craxus 9, again. The name carried weight, not because of its strategic value, but because of him. The human, the ghost, the myth. Rallick didn't dare speak, but he listened. The rumors were everywhere, carried on the breath of frightened soldiers and nervous prisoners. A human had sparked a rebellion so fierce, so brutal, that even Valeri warlords whispered his name with clenched jaws. They called him the man with the knife. A single man, alone, no fleet, no army, just a blade and vengeance. Rallick's gaze flicked toward the stars outside the viewport. He tried to shake off the shiver crawling down his spine. High Commander Seron swept into the room like a storm. His crimson armor glinted beneath the low lights, each step echoing authority. He paused, sneering at the comms display that replayed the Craxus riot footage on loop. "One man," Seron scoffed. "One damned savage with a piece of metal." Rallick flinched as Seron's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "These stories," Seron said, "they're nothing but prisoner fever dreams. Humans exaggerate to preserve hope. Let them. It makes their final screams sweeter." He walked past Rallick, pausing only to glance sideways. "You're new. You'll learn. The Dominion does not fear children wielding toys." But Rallick didn't respond. He couldn't. The commander's words felt hollow, too confident, too dismissive. Seron barked a laugh, returning to his datapad. "Next, you'll be telling me he bleeds acid and walks through plasma fire. You want to survive in this war, officer? Believe in systems, not legends." Yet even as the laughter echoed, it failed to smother the silence that followed. The silence of doubt. Alone, Rallick stood near the observation bay, the soft hum of energy fields draping the room in a hypnotic rhythm. He reached underneath his uniform and drew out a slender pendant, a knife. Silver. Simple. Sharp. His father had worn it. A soldier. Lost on Craxus.
Rallick's fingers traced the edge of the metal, cool against his skin. The pendant was a relic, or maybe a warning. His father used to whisper bedtime stories, not of Valari conquest, but of humans, of the way they adapt, the way they refuse. Now, Rallick stared at the stars and wondered, what if the stories weren't stories? What if the man with the knife was real? The command center bustled with routine, reports, fleet movements, supply logistics, but Raylek's voice cut through like a pulse bomb. "Sir," he said, stepping forward. Siren turned, eyebrow raised. "Speak?" Raylek met his gaze. "Then why is the Dominion still afraid of humans?" The silence was instant. A technician froze mid-command. A junior aide dropped a data crystal. Siren's smile vanished. "What did you say?" Raylek didn't flinch. "If humans are weak, if they're just children with toys, why are their whole fleets assigned to patrol human sectors? Why does every prison station have riot drills? Why does Craxus 9 still burn?" Siren's eyes narrowed. The tension in the room thickened. "You're not paid to think, officer." "I wasn't thinking, sir. I was remembering." Siren turned away, but the question hung in the air, unanswered, heavy. Hours passed. Lights dimmed. The command center quieted. Raylek stood alone again, eyes lost in the void beyond the glass. Stars shimmered, but something else lingered, something unseen, a pulse, a presence. Out there, someone walked the ashes of Craxus, not as a myth, not as a story, but as a man with a knife. Raylek clenched the pendant in his fist. The Dominion had built a galaxy-spanning empire on fear and control, but they never understood what they feared most. Not firepower, not fleets, will. And in one human's defiance, that will had found a voice sharp enough to echo through time. Raylek turned back to his console. Doubt still clung to him, but something else did too. Curiosity. And maybe, just maybe, hope.